Module 16, Recovery After Training and Competition. What's the importance of nutrition in recovery from exercise and training? Well, first on the list here is replenishing liver and muscle glycogen stores, with the muscle taking precedence over the liver in this regard. So if you think about this from a training standpoint and the muscle adapting to training, it's going to take a lot of energy to maintain that tissue. It's going to take a lot of energy to build that tissue up and force it to adapt. So we want to divert carbohydrates in the direction of muscle so that we can pack in as much glycogen as possible to make sure that we're maintaining and repairing and allowing adaptations to occur within the muscle. We also want to make sure that we have a replenishment of fluids and electrolytes, which we discussed back in Module 12. The other issue here is just overall, we want to make sure that we're providing sufficient nutrients so that we allow for regeneration of tissue, we allow for repair of tissue, as well as any adaptations that might happen as a result of exercise training. Now, it's important to note that exercise is a form of catabolic stress. So in the short term, as we have discussed previously, exercise does provide this stress that puts us in a catabolic state very temporarily. So it's important that we support the process post-exercise so that we can ensure optimal regeneration, repair, and adaptations of all tissues. What should my strategy be to optimize recovery? Well, the first thing we want to look at is the amount of carbohydrate. So one of the things that has been stressed in recent years is to avoid expressing carbohydrate as a percent of overall energy. So suggesting that somebody consume, for example, 60% carbohydrate in their diet or 65%, that's actually not the best way to do it according to the recent literature. It's really more appropriate to basically look at carbohydrate intake on a per kilogram basis of body mass, and that seems to be, at least according to the literature, a better way to make recommendations. So as far as for the immediate recovery after exercise, so within 4 hours of exercise, about 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram per hour of consumed carbohydrate at frequent intervals is what's recommended. If you have recovery, if you're looking at recovery as an issue, then moderate duration, low intensity training would require about 5 to 7 grams per kilogram per day of carbohydrate. As far as moderate to heavy endurance exercise training for daily recovery from that, about 7 to 12 grams per kilogram per day is what's recommended. And then for daily recovery from extreme training, so the person is training for 4 to 6 plus hours per day, then that jumps up to about 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body mass per day. The focus should be on high carbohydrate, nutrient-dense food. So if you recall, with consumption of calories for athletes, it's really a challenge to get athletes to eat if they have rigorous training schedules, if their caloric needs are well above 4, 5, 6,000 calories. It's kind of a challenge. So we want to make sure that every single calorie counts as far as nutrient density is concerned. What's interesting is that in the literature, there doesn't seem to be a difference between eating fewer larger meals or more frequent smaller meals with respect to the 24-hour muscle glycogen restoration. So over a 24-hour period of time, the feeding pattern doesn't really seem to make much of a difference. However, this could make more of a difference, as we'll discuss, with bouts of exercise that are packed in closely together. So over a 24-hour period of time, the amount of muscle glycogen that's going to be packed into muscle will occur no matter what strategy you take as far as feeding is concerned. The type of carbohydrate is obviously important, and post-exercise, it seems that a moderate to high glycemic index type food might be the best, simply because it's going to cause an increase in blood glucose, and that glucose then is going to be diverted to where we'd like it to go, which is mostly muscle tissue. The form of carbohydrate doesn't seem to make much of a difference. In research studies looking at liquid carbohydrate meals versus solid meals containing carbohydrate, it doesn't seem to make a difference as far as glycogen resynthesis is concerned. So the body doesn't really differentiate the form initially of the food and thus the carbohydrate. As far as the timing of carbohydrate is concerned, we have several scenarios here that we'll look at. We'll start off with endurance exercise. So immediately post-exercise, it seems that glycogen synthesis was greater with glucose intake compared with a 2-hour feeding delay. So the sooner that you could get glucose into the athlete, then the greater the glycogen synthesis would be. And it seems that if you add protein, that actually may have a synergistic effect, so you get even more carbohydrate packed in as muscle glycogen. As far as the various sizes and the times of the meals, it seems once again that if you ate 4 large meals or you had many small snacks with or without fat or protein, there seems to be a similar 24-hour muscle glycogen content. So it really didn't matter again as far as the way that you've got the carbohydrate in your diet. What really matters is that you ate carbohydrate over a 24-hour period. However, again, if we're looking at short training schedules, multiple bouts of exercise that are closely scheduled together, then perhaps eating carbohydrates and high carbohydrate meals immediately after exercise might be the better way to go to ensure that the subsequent exercise performance is going to be maintained. As far as resistance exercise is concerned, there seems to be a similar response to endurance exercise as far as the glycogen resynthesis. There have been quite a number of studies that looked at protein-glucose combinations and these glucose drinks that do serve to increase whole body protein synthesis. In some other work, interestingly, if you took carbohydrate and then a complete protein and then added some individual amino acids to that actually had a more positive effect on nitrogen balance. So that actually would then cause a decrease in fractional breakdown rate of protein and increasing the fractional synthetic rate. However, again, this was just 1 or 2 studies, I believe, that looked at this, so we do need more research in this area before we start making mass general recommendations for this. Multiple bouts, as I've iterated a few times, is very, very important as far as the timing is concerned, because if you are performing several bouts of exercise, whether they be endurance or resistance training, we need to make sure that the person is getting the carbohydrate intake that they need very, very quickly, so that by the time their next bout of exercise, if it's in within a few hours, their muscle glycogen levels are back to where they need to be in order to perform their best. As far as carbohydrate post-exercise, and that more specifically is going to be immediately and 1 hour post, there seems to be a more positive nitrogen balance over the course of 24 hours. We have an attenuation of 3-methylhistidine excretion, so there's less excretion of protein, less reliance on protein, less degradation of protein. So we have an increase in insulin and decrease in protein degradation. This also inhibits cortisol release, which is important to minimize catabolism. As far as amino acids post-exercise are concerned, we know that we can get muscle to increase protein synthesis, and this was found to be done with just as little as 6 to 12 grams of essential amino acids in a 10 to 20 gram dose of high-quality protein. It seems that essential and branched-chain amino acids included in an amino acid beverage would increase the sensitivity to insulin and, of course, promote protein synthesis and glycogen storage. However, it seems that in this particular study that it also promoted protein degradation. So as we saw that in previous lectures, that yes, exercise does stimulate a little bit of catabolic response as far as protein degradation is concerned, but in the long term we will get an increase in protein synthesis. So not quite sure what's going on in this particular research study, because they also found that high protein intake actually decreased plasma levels of testosterone, which of course is necessary for protein synthesis. So more research is definitely warranted in this particular area. We also know that amino acids are more important for resistance-trained athletes compared with an endurance-trained athlete. So as long as the athlete who's an endurance-trained athlete is consuming a high carbohydrate intake that is about 10 grams per kilogram of body mass per day, then perhaps these effects that we're seeing in these research studies would be ameliorated. So this is more important for athletes performing multiple events in a 24-hour period, more than the person who is training once a day and in allowing themselves to recover. So perhaps amino acids become more important for individuals who are doing high intense training and combining endurance and resistance exercise and doing that in a very, very short time frame with little rest. So some general guidelines here as far as recovery is concerned. We want to try to consume carbohydrates early on within the first hour of exercise to really get that increase in the rate of glycogen synthesis. It, however, as we've discussed, may not have physiological importance for those individuals who are exercising just once per day. It's more important for individuals who are exercising with multiple bouts or competing in multiple events in the same day. So the delayed feeding in those instances would make a difference as far as glycogen restoration is concerned. So that is an important distinction that you should make in some of the literature, and that is the rate of glycogen synthesis can vary depending upon the timing. However, what's the practical application of that information? Is it going to be geared towards the athlete who's performing several bouts of exercise every single day? Or is it going to be geared towards the athlete who is exercising once per day and allowing for recovery so that glycogen can be restored? What's more important for the athlete above glycogen restoration, particularly for those who are performing multiple bouts, is that we have to have substrate or carbohydrate delivered to muscle so that it can repair and adapt. So not having that glycogen, not having the substrates available can definitely affect the regenerative process, the repair process, etc. So if less than 8 hours separate exercise sessions, then you want to try to get that carbohydrate in as soon as possible or is convenient. So during longer recovery periods, it's really not a big deal. So using practical practice food ingestion plans, as well as a more comfortable type of consumption of food for the athlete, is really what's more important. Make the athlete feel comfortable with their ingestion of food, as opposed to trying to force this rigorous regimen when really over the course of a 24-hour period that would be unnecessary if they have the luxury of time between their exercise sessions. We of course want to ensure that there is sufficient overall energy intake to match the given needs of the athlete. We also, I've been stressing this all along, it's very, very important, always practice the meal consumption plan, the beverage consumption plan way ahead of the competition so that you can individualize the meal plan and tailor it specifically to the athlete so you know that you're not going to run into any kind of issue with gastrointestinal distress, etc., and optimize performance on competition day. That should be the last thing that you're thinking about on competition day. We also, of course, want to avoid excessive alcohol consumptions for obvious reasons. Moderation's okay. Excessive alcohol consumption not conducive to optimal performance in the athlete. As far as some special notes are concerned, there has been some work looking at the infusion of carbohydrate intravenously. And in a few research studies, they actually did find that the rate of glycogen resynthesis was increased compared with just eating food. And this could potentially be useful for things like the Tour de France, where you have an event that takes place over the course of weeks. So perhaps there is an advantage there. However, the one thing that was discovered was that the total amount of glycogen packed into muscle actually did not increase. So there was no advantage with respect to that. The only advantage was that you could get to that total amount of muscle glycogen, the maximum amount, much quicker compared with just feeding. So if you're trying to recover muscle glycogen much faster, so it's the end of the day and you're not cycling anymore and you want to get that muscle glycogen back up to maximum capacity, then perhaps this would be a good way to go. However, the safety is still questionable because all the research participants in this particular study actually vomited and were nauseated after chronic infusion of carbohydrates. So there may be something going on there, and you have to ask yourself whether or not this is worth it. And it's certainly not something that is recommended for the masses. So simply consuming carbohydrates through normal means and digestion and absorption, passing through the enterocytes, etc., will achieve the same total amount of glycogen storage without some of the problems associated with infusion of carbohydrates intravenously. As far as the co-ingestion of other macronutrients, well, some research looked at when carbohydrate intake was insufficient that the presence of protein actually seemed to enhance muscle glycogen recovery. So there was a little bit of the picking up of slack from not having carbohydrate in the diet by protein. As well as some researchers tried to add an additional 1,500 calories to the athletes' diets to enhance glycogen resynthesis. However, that just didn't happen. So it seems that adding above and beyond the caloric need of the athlete doesn't seem to afford any sort of advantage as well as far as glycogen resynthesis is concerned.